Good boy. All right. Hi, everybody. It's me.
Hi, everybody. It's me.
And we are going live, and I am here in ESO, of course, Elder Scrolls Online, a mega multiplayer. Well, no, it's not a mega. It's just a multiplayer a universe. And here I'm saying hi, 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 hi. Let's see. There, for anybody who comes in. Okay, so for those of you who always like to know where I am, we are in my grand Sijic villa. My entrance is a little different than most people's because it was designed for a housing contest a couple years ago that had to do with romance for Valentine's Day. And this is my the trysting. So we've got two Sharp as Night and Hildegard meeting. This is their meeting, a romantic meeting place. And if you watch them long enough, they will begin to do their, they'll begin to talk or do their stuff. Oh, he's saying goodbye. Oh my gosh, I can't believe he just said goodbye. She said goodbye. Oh, that's really interesting. I've never had them say goodbye. Maybe they're done. Huh. Very interesting. Oh, maybe they're glitched out. Interesting. Yeah, interesting. Let's replay their dialogue. Maybe from the beginning. Maybe because they just, who knows? I don't know, but they have some interesting dialogue that when they say it together, one after the other, it's quite fun. Anyways, this is a dedication area to Mara, our goddess of couples and marriage and relationship and all that good stuff. Okay, so it is the weekly Faery-Chronicles author narration, and I'm getting to a location where I can have a seat. And this is a small little crafting area, but I want to go over here, and I could have gone around it, but I'm showing off my area a little bit. So I think what we'll do is we'll start off by coming up here to this scenic view. This is for wood elves, an altar for wood elves. But we're gonna maybe come out here. I don't know. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I'll just have a stand right here and we'll look at the scenery from here. Okay, are you ready to get going? I'm looking. Hey, hi. Hi, Ashley. Nice to see you. And to the rest of you who are tuned in and watching, we're gonna get ready and begin our uh, chronicles, A Fairy with Teeth. And I'm continuing from page 152. The chapter title is Pretense. And here we go. Kildare House was a quaint white with black trim farmhouse B&B. It had 2 levels, was oblong and unassuming. A bold red door greeted the weary traveler. Off the kitchen sat a small vegetable garden, and behind that clothes fluttered on lines. White hawthorn trees in bloom bordered a back area, and beyond them rose a small grassy mound, mostly obscured by the trees. A short drive curved to the front parking area, empty of the white coach, which was currently being retired at a local garage. The driveway cut between 2 small pastures, the right pasture for cattle and the left one for horses. The team of 4 sat outside under an umbrella enjoying some refreshments. They needed a few minutes of peace and quiet. Dinner could wait. The pilgrims would have to wait. Vivian sipped a cup of tea from Rosina bone china, examining the pink, delicate flowers and green filigree leaves hand-painted on the bowl of the cup. This was one custom Americans lacked, the art of teetoting. She must remember to continue having afternoon tea after returning home. She stretched out her legs, sitting back against a thick cotton cushion, and yawned. The late afternoon sun shot out its soft warmth, which lingered over the 4 comrades, each exhausted and thankful everything appeared to be back to normal. No one spoke. The front door opened. Michael and Claire stepped out. Michael had the look of a crazy Irishman. His clear blue eyes held a hint of insanity. He wore a benign smile on his childlike face, topped with disheveled white hair. His clothing was frumpy, a farm man look, dirty jeans and rumpled shirt, half tucked in, half hanging out, fly open like he'd been on the pot and had hurried out to greet them. Claire had a cherub face with deep blue eyes and a wide mouth. She wore her red hair short and just as messy as her husband's. She chattered non-stop, which was great fun and helped ease the discomfort everyone might feel. A chubby, middle-aged housewife experiencing a sense of liberation is how Vivian might have described her. Vivian liked both of them instantly. "Well, Joe lad," Michael said, smiling, "the mechanic has called for you to come pick up your coach. I'll give you a ride over to fetch it." "Ah, that's good news." Joe was quick to respond, coming to his feet. He took a last sip of his tea and gave Vivian a wink as he hurried to catch up with Michael. "Now, I wish I had equally good news," confided Claire behind her hand. It appears that the golf club has cancelled your holiday, well, your dinner reservations for a much larger party. You see, today is a holiday, and they've gone and overbooked their establishment with a very large gathering this evening, apparently a wedding party, and they have asked me to extend their apologies to your regroup for any inconvenience this may have caused. She paused, twisting her hands anxiously. Vivian laughed, shaking her head. Carla almost burst into tears. "Now, if you want to eat at a really nice place here in Kaitili," Claire offered, "then I know of a lovely spot. It's in Kaitili Castle." "That sounds great," squeaked Carla, relieved. "Do you think they're open, this being a holiday and all?" "Oh, sure they are." Claire paused, tapped a finger to her chin. Well, we best call. I'll come with you, said Carla, and the two women headed off. Cian and Vivian sat alone. The sounds of late afternoon rose in the sudden silence, the buzzing of bees, the call of a lark, the busy talk of magpies, the distant and occasional lulling of cattle or whinny of a horse. Well, what do you think of this place? Cian asked softly. It's peaceful, laughed Vivian, and Claire and Michael are great. I told you you'd like them. He laid his hand over hers. Both eyes jump into the source of affection, nervousness flaring to life, mixed with giddy emotion and burning desire, guilt and uncertainty. Cian withdrew his hand as if he had just touched a leper, then reached for another scone. Claire makes great scones, he mumbled, stuffing one into his mouth. In the awkward silence that followed, the small talk came, meaningless chatter to pass the time, to obscure the growing tension. Tentative glances were cast on short lines that could quickly be reeled back in. The sun shifted and peeked out from behind a cloud low on the horizon. A light wind began to blow. The atmosphere seemed to darken. Cian closed. Vivian turned cold. Both hid behind cloaks of falsehood. The balance trembled. Light weighed the scale lower and lower, and out of the balance Vivian grasped to take back what she had put there. Her mind quiet, sane, serene now. She did this by pretending that earlier fears had never existed, that she had no cares. She did not want to feel anything. And the earlier dreams and desires were turned to loosened fragrances and shadows and hopes, gray as ashes of wood that fell away and were no more. Broad, fake smiles flashed as their talk turned to business. Each speculated over the turn of events, but not for an instant did a remote glimmer of what had been seductively exchanged just then or hours before while on the bus pass between them. In the raw moment, Cian refused to tell her about the coven, about the ritual sacrificing, about what he feared had transpired on Knockadune. He needed to hold on to the normalcy of their conversation, the mental image of two friends having afternoon tea. They got on well, he decided. Were only good friends, and that was just the way they must stay at all costs. And when the cantankerous cry of a raven sliced through Cian's nerves, he turned his mind to the things of ordinary life, walking his dogs, fixing the kitchen plumbing, buying a new hoe, cleaning out the run-down pig coop and turning it into a sanctuary or a workshop maybe, a place in which to create his art. Faery-Chronicle entry 2.000.1. In that space in time, they were free of the bonds of Macha. She had distracted to something else, leaving the couple to deal with their mortal lives, leaving them alone. They were for the moment of the hour unfettered, and a rainbow of hope glistened in the conservative reaches of their inner minds. They were being good and faithful spouses. Well, there you have it. We have our first chapter So I hope you remember what happened last week. Last week was like a powerhouse week when we talked about, or when I read about the whole Loch Crew area. Mm. They're in Loch Gur, the area of Loch Gur now. So it's a pretty interesting location filled with all kinds of historical information. All right, let's continue, shall we? Page 156. The last vestiges of normalcy. Oh, I think maybe I will move over to another location to keep it interesting for you. Oh, goodness. How's this for a location down here at the waterfall? This is a gaming area I set up. See, you can play games. All right. Anyways. Okay, let's continue, shall we? My dog is chewing today. She's driving me crazy. Gracie, stop. Good girl. Okay. Joe wheeled the coach into the drive, bringing it to a stop before the front door. As always, Carla was the first to exit, heading inside to announce the group's arrival and get things set up. The pilgrims filed off. Vivian stood in the empty bus waiting for Kian. This place is a little... Wait, it doesn't seem right. Just a sec. Sorry, I know it's right. Oh boy. All right. This place is a little too high cost for the likes of me, said Joe, leaning against the back of... Oh, that was Kian. Gosh, don't you just hate how I, massacre the narration? That's what happens when you listen to an author narrating their own book instead of a professional narrator doing an audio book. You get all the mix-ups and stuff like that. This place is a little too high cost for the likes of us, said Kian, leaning against the back of Joe's seat. Joe thumped him on the butt. I'm not interested in looking at that, Joe exclaimed. Kian grinned. Vivian watched their play, tight-lipped, feeling the disappointment. Group dining was pleasurable, but without Joe and Kian there, it meant she would have to carry the full load of conversation. She had been looking forward to just sitting back tonight. Okay, Vivian mumbled and climbed down the steps. She paused at the castle door and watched the coach taillights get smaller as it moved down the road. The castle where the group dined was quaint, although Vivian thought its exterior was a reflection of the Madonna Inn in Northern California. Shocking. Pink. God-awful pink. You know, like Pepto-Bismol. Doing these tours with Vivian is like a vacation for me, said Joe, mouthful of food. The two men sat in a chipper eating hamburgers and chips. Why's that? asked Kian. Vivian and Carla are both so nice, and their groups are the ones that make me feel so welcome. I've given hundreds of tours, and usually I'm Joe the driver. I'm expected to fade into the background when not driving, but not with these people. I'm part of them. Yeah, Vivian does have a way of making you feel very needed and involved. Sweet bejesus, the last time we took them to the airport, I was sad. For days afterward, I felt pretty lonely. Kian laughed. Bullocks. I thought I was the only one to feel so empty. He shook his head and checked his watch. Joe grinned, a mischievous twinkle coming to his eye. Kian looked up and frowned. What? You got the hots for Vivian, haven't you? What are you talking about, man? Snarled Kian. Well, if Carla wasn't pregnant, I might have me a go. Right, Kian laughed. Ah, well, Joe sighed. Me motto is keep a professional demeanor. The boss is off limits. Leave the staff alone. But the tourists are different. Flirt with them, make 'em feel good, favored, especially that's what they want. Ah, so let me get this right, you wanker. Vivian is off limits and Carla is staff, Kian grumbled. The empty hamburger wrap into a ball and stood. He tossed it in his cup into a trash can. Joe followed suit. That's right, Joe said, grinning, and I think Vivian's got an eye for you, I do. You're cheeky. Kian gave Joe a thump on the back of the head as they left the diner and headed back to the castle. When they entered the restaurant lounge, Steve and Mark were seated at the bar. How was your dinner? Joe asked, taking an empty seat next to Steve. Kian remained standing. He leaned against the bar beside Joe. Wonderful, but I'm too full, responded Mark. Everyone else still upstairs eating? Kian asked. The women folk are, said Mark. And kin, Steve added for effect. They're just finishing their desserts. Mark and I figured we'd have time to catch a drink with the both of you. Not me, said Joe. I don't drink on the job. Steve shrugged and ordered a round for whoever was drinking. This reminds me of the time I was in Switzerland. He began recounting one of the endlessly boring sagas of his life. Kian and Joe indulged the man. After all, Steve was a paying customer, although he wasn't into the pilgrimage. Steve just wanted to hang out with the boys, shoot the breeze, impress whomever he could. No harm indulging the man his needs. Besides, Kian figured they were helping Vivian by taking care of Steve. The man was wearing on her nerves. Vivian had made it clear during tea that afternoon that if Steve kept making remarks about the hocus pocus stuff, she was liable to say something to him, and if she did, it wasn't going to be pleasant. Take care of Steve. Keep him happy. Make him feel, I don't know, important, she had said. To do so was little effort. Mark, however, cringed when the narration began. He was sick and tired of sitting in the back of the bus with this guy listening to his endless bullshit. But Mark was a pushover. He didn't know how to say, "Excuse me, Steve, could you shut the fuck up?" Not that that's what he'd say, really, but how he wished he could. Lucky for him, the bar had a television and it was turned on. It didn't matter what was on as long as it was on. Mark saluted with the others, glued his eyes to the television, and tuned the nasal drawl of Steve out. Kian tossed down the last of his powers and lemonade, remembering the envelope that Carla had given him. He fished it out of his pocket and ripped it open. Turning a shoulder to the other three men, he leaned forward, elbows on the bar, and opened the card pinned in Carla's neat script, all the time believing it was Vivian's writing. He read Vivian's poem, thinking it was meant for the bard, each line stabbing him, conjuring a whirlwind of anger. He crushed the fine linen paper in his hands and stormed out of the lounge. Kian, where are you going? Marcella was coming down the red carpeted stairs. Her long brown hair hung free over her shoulders, large dark blue eyes flickering with desire. A corner of Kian's mouth turned up at the sight of her. He leaned against the exterior door jamb. I was going outside for a smoke. Want to join? He asked seductively. Why, sure. Good breath of fresh air will do me good. Marcella crossed the foyer and skirted past Kian as he held the door open for her. A velvet blanket of clouds filled the heavens. Brr, it's much colder here, Marcella said, moving close to Kian. Here, let me keep you warm. He said, shaking out the match and putting his arm around her. Where's your jacket? I didn't think I needed one, so I left it on the bus. Marcella smiled demurely, stood on tiptoe, and kissed Kian lightly on the lips. That's for being such a gentleman. Is that how you always say thank you? He asked. Not always, she admitted, but maybe we could take a little walk around the castle. Right. Kian was quick to respond, his only thought being to accommodate a pilgrim's request. Marcella looped her arm through his. A lovely little garden spread out beside the castle. They walked along its gravel path, winding between trimmed conifers and other perennials. Sure does get cold here, Marcella said, hoping Kian would put his arm around her again, but getting a smile and a nod of the head from him instead. You and Vivian seem to be pretty close, Marcella ventured. You know, Steve is pretty open-minded. Kian frowned. He's quite the voyeur, she added, though you wouldn't know that to look at him. Kian pulled his arm away. Look, he said politely, I don't know where you're going with this, and I don't know what you people do in Alabama or Georgia, wherever you're from, but we aren't like that here. Marcella smiled and slipped her arm back through his, urging him to continue their walk. After a short pause, she said, no harm in asking. Right, Kian replied with a disgusted look. He shook his head and peered into the night. Just as long as we understand each other. No problem, Marcella confirmed. The lighting in the lounge was much lower than in the restaurant. Vivian squirmed, trying to see who was at the bar. She spotted Joe, and went to him. Where's Kian? She asked. Joe looked around. Oh, maybe he's outside having a smoke, he said, shrugging his shoulders. You want something to drink? No thanks, Joe. We need to get over to John Riley's pub, so as soon as all the ladies have used the bathroom. Pubbing this evening, are we? He asked, a huge grin on his face. Well, we were supposed to meet with Sean McDowell, the Shawnee, an hour ago, she reminded him. All right, I forgot about that. Joe laid some money on the bar and stood. That's tonight, eh? Not tonight, whined Ken. I'm too tired. I'd much rather go back to the B&B. He looked at his wife. I agree, said Ellen. I've heard enough storytelling to last a lifetime. Ellen was Irish, a Donegal girl. She felt proud to be a national, even though she had struggled with it since she was 25. She had put it into perspective, though, telling herself that most of the younger generation struggled with it, and that most of them left Ireland for some better place, like she had, to live in New Zealand. New Zealand, a new world full of new adventures. Lovely New Zealand, where she had met her American husband while he was on his honeymoon. She'd done business with Ken over the phone for almost 5 years. He'd just been a faceless voice, a rude, arrogant voice at best, when her boss threw a dinner party for Ken and his new bride. Ellen had accepted the invitation. After all, business was business. If a woman wanted to get anywhere in business, well, she had to play with the big wigs, you know. And Ken was one of the big wigs. Never in her wildest dream did she expect to fall head over heels for him that very night. She knew if she played her cards right, she could win him, even though it did take 5 years. Ken, gorgeous American Ken, had become her husband. They were married 3 months after his divorce was final. They were married in the beautiful winterland of Lake Tahoe. 2 years later, she gave birth to his son. She was his queen, and she was going to make sure she always was. No one could steal him out from under her nose without a hard fight on her hands. No one, not even Vivian. She noticed the way her husband looked at Vivian. But then Ken always flirted. One of his faults that Ellen did not tolerate very well. "Sounds like everyone's pretty tired," Joe said, turning so no one but Vivian could hear him. "Yeah, well," Vivian paused, seeing Carla in the foyer. "It's time to go." She gave Joe a pat on the back, then went to her business partner. "How you feeling, Carla?" "Fine. Why?" Carla cocked her head to one side. Vivian glanced back at Ken. "Well, Ken and Ellen want to go back to the B&B." "They don't want to hear Sean McDowell?" Carla asked, shocked. "No, I know, but don't ask me why they would want to pass up this opportunity. Ken says he's too tired." Carla shook her head in disgust. "Unbelievable," she mumbled. "So let's get everyone in the bus," instructed Vivian. "Find out who wants to go back to the B&B and who's up for the storytelling." "Do you think he'll still be there?" asked Carla. Vivian shrugged. The bathroom door pushed open. The rest of the women came out laughing and talking. "Time to go," Carla greeted them. The group reconvened inside the bus. "So, who is interested in going to listen to Sean McDowell?" Carla asked as Joe started the engine. "Because of the late hour and the possibility that he might not have waited for us, I'd rather just go back to the B&B," said Marcella, avoiding eye contact and glancing at Steve, already asleep in the seat next to her. "Okay, well, who does want to go?" asked Vivian. "I do," said Rose in a tiny voice, raising a hand in the air. All right, that's chapter 2 down. I'm going to take some water in and then move to another position. Now, this next chapter is probably the longest in the book. So we're not going to get through it all today. We'll have to split it up into 2 weeks. Okay. Which is okay to do. This is a big land. I want to come over here and up into this area where we can stand. Okay. We'll sit right here while I read this next section. Okay. All right, here we go. Maybe we'll get through it. I don't know. We'll see. All right, here we go. Page 163. The Shawnee. God, I'm so embarrassed, Vivian said, refusing to be the first to enter the lounge at John Riley's pub. It was 10:30, and they were an hour and a half late. She pushed Joe ahead of her and stepped behind Cian. Fine, said Joe. I'll go in first and see if he's here. Sean McDowell was born and bred Lochar. He had grown up with stories of the fairy and had encountered them personally. At 87 he was still in good shape, but there was a haunted look to his red-rimmed eyes. This Vivian noticed immediately as they awkwardly stood about the old man. I guess I got mixed up on the time, Sean McDowell said, his words slightly slurred. No, we're late, Carla assured him. I thought we were supposed to meet at 9 o'clock. We were, but our bus had flat tires, said Cian. English, are ya? Sean McDowell asked, glaring at Cian. No, born in Cork. Went to school in London for a while, Cian clarified. That's good, as we don't take kindly to that kind around here, Sean McDowell said with a curt nod. I tried calling you earlier this evening, but there was no answer, Carla informed him. No, I left my house for the evening at about 8, so you would have missed me. Well then, he said, pausing, and looked at the small group. I was expecting a much larger group, he said, eyeing Cian. The English aren't well liked in these parts, he added. Vivian and Carla looked at each other. Well, we were put so far behind schedule that by the time everyone had dinner, most people were so tired they wanted to go to sleep, said Carla. Yes, I suppose it's late and all. Yeah, John likes a big crowd better for business, he mumbled. What do you drink? He asked Cian as if it were a test, but before Cian could answer, added, The Irish love the whiskey. Myself, I drink only Guinness these days after me sweet Kate passed away. God rest her soul. Not much of a crowd, are you, tonight? Well, I suppose John will have to be satisfied. Well, we're here, said Vivian, a bit agitated. Well, and so ye are, he said, smiling at her. So let's have a seat. You want to hear about the fairy now, do ya? His weary blue eyes focused on Vivian. With a weathered hand, Sean McDowell motioned for her to sit next to him. Obediently, Vivian took the seat to his right, while the others chose seats across the table from the man. Before the old storyteller would begin his tales, a pint of Guinness was put before him, the white head capping the black liquid like any distant snow peak one would see in a winter land. Laughter spilled into the lounge from the bar, where 3 men sat, their backs bent over their drinks, disinterested in the Shawnee telling stories to another bunch of tourists. In the lounge, 5 stools sat empty around the curve of an old mahogany bar in bad need of a good polish. And next to this, an archway led into a long winding hallway. A light from a room beyond bled into the empty space. Mary Riley, the sister of the pub's owner, stood behind the bar, drying a glass with a gray dish towel frayed from overuse. Her face was careworn, with a stern, tight-lipped smile. Gray eyes darted from man to man sitting before her. She nodded with a grunt to something one of them said. Although the lighting was not as low as that in the bar, in the lounge it was subdued, throwing shadows into corners and swallowing the empty dark wood tables nestled along the side wall. A candle, glowing mutely through red-tinted glass, sat in the center of each table, with condiments, salt and pepper shakers, and little bags of sugar held in wooden boxes clustered around it. A small fire struggled in the large hearth that took up one entire wall, covered with granite slabs. A granite shelf protruded about 5 feet above the hearth opening. On this sat an old mantel clock, Mullingar pewter beer carafes, and a Waterford crystal vase filled with an arrangement of silk flowers. Behind the clock a large beveled mirror hung, reflecting the back of the clock and a red glowing word from the far side of the room. The remaining walls of the lounge were painted pale yellow and lettered with the usual posters of Irish athletes and harps, or signs spelling out Guinness or Jameson in red neon. Heavy navy blue curtains of a large floral motif hung over the two large front windows. The patchwork glass divided with yellow wooded strips between the two windows was set the heavy oak front door, its iron back and bar slid back. The clearly worn wood floors were uncarpeted, except for a navy blue throw at the foot of the front door. The room was just as Vivian remembered. Nothing had changed, not one piece of decoration or piece of furniture, nothing taken away and nothing added. The lounge of the Locker Inn was as it had been for years, and as it would be for years to come. Vivian found solace in this and leaned back, relaxing. She set her eyes on the man to her left, his thinning hair, wrinkled and weathered face, blue eyes, full lips not yet shriveled into a prune mouth. She noticed the frayed edge on the sleeve of the sky blue cable sweater he wore over a plaid collar shirt, buttoned properly around the neck. The last 3 years had been hard on him, she thought, remembering the first time they had met in 1994. Vivian had sat in the same lounge with him then, except at one of the tables against the sidewall, and listened to him as he told her stories until 4 in the morning. His wife, Kate, had been alive then, sitting to his right, a quiet woman, whose eyes would meet Vivian's and roll skyward, showing her disapproval of the tells. Kate had died suddenly last summer, 2 days before their last pilgrimage was scheduled and where they were to meet with him. Naturally, the event had been canceled. Vivian had liked quiet Kate, feeling an unspoken bond between them. Kate had smiled warmly when Vivian ordered her a drink along with her husband's, the surprise registering in her bright blue eyes before being swiftly checked. The old storyteller began his narration, but the sound of his voice or the cadence with which he spoke had changed. His lilting manner was gone, and he spoke of dark things. Dark things. Yes, of trapped souls and the headless phantom. Vivian shivered and looked across the table. They'll take your soul and feed on it if you let them, Sean McDowell said, holding Carla's gaze. They don't care whether you die or not, just as long as you surrender to them. Carla scooted back in her seat, her hands resting on her belly. She looked sleepy, as if she could barely keep her eyes open. Sean McDowell watched with pleasure as he continued to weave his spell. There was a man who once lived in these parts named Tom McNamara, he cooed. Your man came upon them one night on his way home from the pub. He had him a few too many and was hurrying home so his wife, Mary, wouldn't be too hard with him. As Carla's eyes closed, Sean McDowell fixed his eyes onto Rose, who straightened under the gaze, smiled benignly, placed both elbows on the table, leaned forward to rest her cheek against both hands, and intently gazed back. It was long after midnight when he came to the crossroads, and heard him the sound of a horse-drawn carriage coming up behind him. He dared not look to the sound, nor stop his progress. The coach pulled up beside him, and the door opened. In it sat the most beautiful woman he had ever seen, with ringlets of gold falling down over her shoulders, and eyes of such bright blue they contested the blueness of the sky. She smiled sweetly at him, bringing the flush to his cheeks, and he was helpless, his eyes fixed on the curve of her full lips as she spoke. Rose's eyes glazed over. She too was gone. Her eyelids fluttered, closed, opened, then fell shut. Vivian watched fascinated as Sean McDowell fixed his gaze on Joe, who looked back at the old bard out of respect. "Tom Mac," she says to him, "won't ye come with me to a ball this night and be my escort?" And the fool of a man could only nod his head in agreement. "Then come into my coach," she beckoned him, and he did. He climbed in beside her and sat on soft leather. The coach was lined with rich red velvet, so plush, so soft as the likes of which he had not seen. Her perfume was sweet and intoxicating, and the rise and fall of her fair white breasts above the frill of her gown drew him in. Joe's eyes closed. His head nodded forward before his chin came to rest on his chest. Vivian was amazed at what was happening. Sean McDowell's blue irises turned to Cian, whose brown eyes stared coldly back. They arrived at the ball, and he escorted her in, and they danced amongst the finest Irish gentry. He stressed, glaring at Cian and continuing. And the Irish lads and lasses dined on the most delicious delicacies, continually brought out and placed on the banqueting tables. The ball came to an end in the wee hours of dawn, and for the first time his mind thought of Mary and how angry she was going to be. He escorted the lady back to her carriage and again climbed in beside her. "May your man make haste," he inquired, "else my lovely Irish Mary will not talk to me for a year." The woman laughed and held out a chalice. "Why worry about your wife when in time she'll get over it, and when tonight ye can have me?" Naturally, as all men would, your man lost himself to the softness of her promise, and when he awoke he was sitting in the middle of old Dooley's farm, and all he could think about was how he was going to explain this to Mary. Vivian watched in horror as Cian's eyes shifted and a faraway look fell over them. Without turning her head, she strained to see Sean McDowell in her periphery, to see if he would next turn to her, but the man's eyes stayed fixed on Cian, a challenging, hard glare set in them. The front door squeaked open, admitting a man and a woman into the lounge. As the door swished closed, a draught of cold night air rushed into the room. Vivian scrunched her shoulders up and shivered. The man pulled the woman after him by one hand and looked down at Vivian as he passed, a devious grin appearing. The couple stopped at the edge of the mahogany bar, where Mary Riley immediately placed a glass of whiskey before the man. He picked it up and turned his back to the bar and openly stared at Vivian. With glass raised to his lips, he nodded before taking the first sip. Vivian looked from one face to the next. Her companions had not noticed the couple, but Sean McDowell sat looking at her now, a grin on his lips. He licked them, then continued. In the end, he was willing to sell his soul to be with her again. Some say she was none other than Anya. Evening, John. He slipped the greeting into his tale so naturally that the words could have been mistaken for part of the tale. Evening, Sean, the man responded so quietly that his words were part of the distant mumbling that leaked into the lounge from the bar through the open archway between the two worlds. During this exchange, he avoided eye contact with Vivian, who, even though distracted by his presence and a gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right, watched the man. So tell us about Anya, Vivian urged, suddenly aware that the storyteller had stopped speaking. A chair scraped against the hardwood floor. She felt the old man's thigh press against hers. She swallowed hard and glanced at Kean, whose brown eyes seemed fixed in an unseeing gaze. Magic. Sean McDowell had woven a spell around them, and Vivian wondered if she was to be his next victim. The man at the bar leaned close to the woman and whispered in her ear. The woman giggled and nestled closer against him until he pulled back, glanced at Vivian before stepping through the archway and disappearing down the hallway. A warm hand covered her own. Vivian jerked her head down. Sean McDowell's wrinkled and weathered hand caressed hers. Vivian involuntarily clasped the sculptured wooden armrest without raising her head and peered up. Sean McDowell wore a soft smile, not menacing at all, or anything that should give her cause to fear, but Vivian felt the coldness penetrate her skin where his flesh had once seemed warm. She saw in the blue orbs of his eyes the endless black pupils falling into hell, and breathed in the sweet smell of sweat rising from his old and leathery body, the scent of age covered by the smell of soap and cheap cologne. He smiled, showing teeth browned by years of tea, corroded or missing, and cringed as a pointed tongue darted out to lick the dryness of cracked lips. Onya is the Munster fairy princess, a goddess of love and fertility, came the voice of the storyteller, expert with years of performance. Surely you know this already, Vivian. He cocked his head to one side. Sure, didn't I send you to her mound years ago? Vivian nodded. Ah, that's a good girl, to follow this old man's directions. I've more to give you, if you'll follow them, he queried. Their eyes locked. Vivian found she could not pull away. His eyes were chains on her awareness, rendering any free will a thing of the past. Who are you? Vivian silently asked, and felt the scare come over her even more as Sean McDowell laughed as if in response to her unspoken question. He leaned closer, their eyes only 6 inches apart, his solidly fixed on hers, devouring her, prying into her mind, her soul. It seemed an eternity they sat like that. Vivian, a helpless animal, caught in a strong trap, waiting for her execution or for rescue. Which was it to be? The silent message that seemed to flow from him were not harmful, yet held a hidden threat. Do as I say or else. Sanctity finally came when Sean McDowell made the mistake of glancing up as the man returned to the room. Seizing the opportunity, Vivian swung her body around in the chair to face the bar, briefly glancing at Kian and Carla and Rose and Joe, who still sat in a stupor. Vivian swung around in her chair and briefly met the eyes of the woman at the bar, a hint of comprehension registering in them, a cry for help or that of a lost soul. Unsure, Vivian looked away, knowing that no hope for help was to be found there. The woman leaned up against the man and openly kissed his mouth, an uncommon display in Ireland. Her kisses were returned, and with wide open eyes, the man looked over the crown of the woman's head at Vivian. Without reservation or even a second thought, the man shoved the woman back, took a swig of the liquor, grabbed the woman's limp hand, turned and headed for the door. As he passed Vivian, he paused, looking down at her. Their eyes briefly meeting, a satisfied look in his. Everything's taken care of, Sean, the man said, using his shoulder to push open the door. He jerked the woman outside after him. So here's where I'm stopping for this week. And there's still more to read in this chapter, but not time to read because the hour is almost up. Yes, it is. So, you know what they say about anything that has to do with storytelling. I'll tell you what they have to say. Sit back and enjoy it. Just sit back and enjoy it. So, this is the last episode in May. And next week will be the first episode of the month of June. And we haven't gotten into the rhythm of it yet, so you might not remember that next week I will be reading, not in ESO as my little avatar here, but in real life, in my studio, as an elf. You'll see me then, and I'll see you then. So thanks for tuning in, and until next week, have a great time. Enjoy life. Be kind to others. Love deeply. Sing loudly. All that old good stuff. And enjoy time. All right. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Bye for now. Take care.